Please. I want to do art. Please. Please stream. Alright, I reset my iPad. Hopefully this will keep me alive a little bit longer. I'm so frustrated. Okay. Trying this again. I didn't even realize she had some like thingy on her design, but hopefully Quan won't mind that I missed that. I'm sorry. Okay. Hopefully, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed this can last long enough so I can just finish this art. I've reset my iPad. Hopefully that'll help. And we're gonna hope. We're gonna hope. Pray to whatever God may listen, that my streaming program will not crash again. Anyway, please continue to ask me your questions. I'm so sorry. I feel so bad. I hate it when it does this. I hate it when it does this because it means, too, that it's harder, like, people can't just go back and watch the stream because most people don't want to watch a stream broken up into 4 pieces, which is why I've started to make my streams unlisted after a little bit, just so I think it'll help me out a little bit better in the algorithm, since my streams are not super hot and popular. Okay. I was wondering why the streams were in a playlist or something. Yeah, I'm sorry. I enlisted them just because they don't get a lot of views anyway, and my channel has not been doing very hot lately, so I thought I might as well just keep those off like my front page. I might go back and edit it, and so there's at least a live a playlist for anyone who wants to go watch the live streams. But for now, they're all of my recent ones are unlisted, so that like stuff like my animation and my my proper videos are the ones that are seen first. How do you break down poses? Like at the very basic level, I guess. I don't know. It's like I gotta sleep for the next hour, so I'm loopy right now. I mean, I'm trying to think of a way I can explain it. It's usually just, it depends, first of all, it depends on, like, what I'm doing, because depending on what the pose is for, it will vary on, like, what kind of pose I can do for it. Like, for example, if I'm doing something that's supposed to be a reference image, I stay away from actually making very dynamic poses. You know, and also, like, I try to make poses where it can show certain things that I want to be seen, you know, like things I like to draw in an outfit or something like that. Although, like, something I do typically, like, if you're having problems with getting, like, for example, energy in a pose, because a lot of people, that's what they struggle with, like, they can do the, like, you know, they can do the, they can draw a pose, but they can't make it look really clean. All of my poses start out basic, or all of my sketches nowadays start out looking like something like this. Really rushed, really roughed in. The hands do not even look like hands. It's a lot of scribbles and swirls, and then, you know, I'd sketch on top of it and get something that's a lot nicer and a lot cleaner. So, yeah, don't be afraid to start off by doing something really, really sketchy and really, really rough just to get the energy into it, because it helps a lot, trust me. How do you feel about the different art thief, all the different art thief? I mean, color pose. Well, it depends what we're talking about, because, like, there are some things that people claim are art theft that are not. You know, like, for example, you cannot, and I mean you cannot, steal a color palette, and anyone that tries to convince you can is does not understand how limited in the world colors are, and how there are only so many combinations of colors that look appealing. Um, no, but you know, it depends on what it is. I mean, it's obviously different if somebody like copies a character down to its exact colors. That can be that can be a sign that the character is very directly ripped off. However, like, if two characters have a similar color palette, that is not theft. It is not, because you can't steal colors. You just can't. It is not the same thing as stealing an idea, because colors are not your idea. Colors are a thing that exists. See this? You see this right here? These colors? These belong to everybody, because we all have them on all of our art programs. If any, the earth owns colors. Oh, goodness. Yeah, it just depends on the situation. I do even think there's some people who exaggerate character theft sometimes. Not always, but sometimes people say, like, you stole my character from me, like, you ripped off my idea, but then you look at the two characters side by side and you read their bios and are like, they're nothing alike. I've had a fan actually rip off a character of mine, and I call it a ripoff because even the bio was essentially copy pasted with just a few words switched around. Like, like pronouns were switched around, and whatever. And the person, I don't think they realized what they were doing, because they thought they weren't doing it with malicious intent, is what I'm saying, which is why I never really made a big deal about it. I just don't think they realized what they were doing. Because they said it was inspired by Infinity, but then I looked at it, and, like, the most that was different was the character was like, quote unquote, time based now rather than space based. The colors were slightly different, but the essential design, like the vibe and the general idea of design, the word for word the same. Not currently. Her bio's been updated since then, but back when I had an older version of her bio, the words were there were some sentences that were copy pasted from her bio word for word. So, you know, that's a case where I can say, like, yeah, that's a bit of a ripoff, a little bit there. But I didn't say anything because the person obviously wasn't doing it with malicious intent. I don't even know if they probably have changed that character at this point now. Um, but that happened. It was funny. pony artist I used to follow tried constantly to get their followers to attack others because of color theft or braids or something else. Like, yeah, characters have a couple things in common, but not much. Yeah, and I don't know who you're talking about, obviously, but I've seen other things like that before. That stuff's ridiculous to me, especially with it. I've seen just so many people where they're like, this person is stealing my character, and I look at the two side by side, and they're nothing alike. And, you know, and rip-offs aren't always visual, you know? Two characters don't have to look the same to be a rip-off, but, like, in these cases, they were certainly not rip-offs. And here's the thing, I understand where it comes from. A lot of the times it comes from a place of being protective, you know? Like, you kind of instinctively get a bit defensive, you know? And that's normal. I've had friends who in the past have had moments where they're like, I think this person's stealing their character, like my character, but we as their friends have always like told them if we thought it was genuinely ripping off, we would tell them. But you know, but at the same time, if like when she would show, like when this friend showed us like, I think this person's stealing this character, we pointed out, like, actually, like, I don't think so. Like, yeah, the colors are similar, but that's about it. And even then, the colors are not like color picked off of your character, clearly. It's just like the same, it's just similar pastel colors. So, you know, like, that stuff happens, and I think it's totally understandable. I just can't stand people who, like, lose their absolute mind, especially because it is 100% possible to create characters that are visually or narratively similar to each other on accident. It's happened to me before. It's happened to me. I have a friend, if anyone remembers this, me and Michelle make jokes all the time, me and Twisted Disaster, because we have two, like, significantly different stories, but a lot of our characters are like narratively very similar, and we think it's hilarious. Sometimes even visually similar. Like, we had a joke about the the short white-haired asshole club, because we both had characters that were short, had white hair, and were just total trolls all the time. So, you know, like, that stuff happens, and it's totally normal, and there's nothing to get angry about. You know what I'm saying? And I mean, I think there is genuine, like, theft out there. It happens. It's just, like, people blow up the things that aren't theft, and then suddenly it becomes harder and harder to tell where the line is. Thanks for... Aw, thank you, Purple Potato. You're sweet. I remember a store I follow on Instagram getting upset because another store created something that used a B, just because of the future store. Oh, Lord. Okay, this red. Are you still into Steven Universe? I like it. I'm a fan of it still. Like, I still like this stuff, and I like fan art for it. There is a zine I was a part of related to Steven Universe for a bit, but I'm never going to be, like, a huge mega fan like I was before. But I still like the show and all that. I haven't started to hate it or something weird like that. I've just become much more of a casual fan now. If someone copyrights a color palette, they have a problem. I would agree. Here we go. Okay, now I gotta color these glasses real quick. And I gotta do some color tweaks, just a little bit. Some of this line art, just to tweak the colors a little bit here. 1 second. Yeah? Okay. Love you too. I was saying goodnight to my mom. Don't mind me. How do you do your line art? Like, how do you get it to be the color you're drawing under it? Oh, well, because my line art is always set to a multiply layer. So I can typically pick a color that generally works and put it on multiply, and then have that, and then whenever I color under it, it'll change color accordingly. But sometimes it doesn't work out though. Like for example, the default color I typically use when it comes to things like blues and greens, it doesn't work. So I have to, at that point, I have to go back and I have to tweak the color a little bit. But that's generally what I do. Because yeah, it usually works out and it usually looks pretty. All right, shading time. Fingers crossed that I can actually shade this. Oh well, actually I gotta add some lenses to her glasses real quick. Sody mom. You all have permission to call my mother Zodi Mom. Mother Zodiac. Shading time. How do I shade? I take a layer, I put it on multiply, and then I pick a color and I go. I go ham. What mic do you use? The default mic on my iPad. Will you have more Jackbox streams? Sure. I will eventually. I want to. I like having. I like playing Jackbox with you guys. I have this issue when I make OCs. My brain always associates two things, and I try to avoid that much as I can. Any tips? I'm not sure I understand what you mean, Daisy Loop. Like you, I'm not sure what you mean and what you need help with. Any tips for lighting? I mean, I don't have a lot of like really good tips for just general ones, like off the top of my head. The most I could say is just make sure you have, you have a solid idea of your light source. I would say when you're doing lighting, it's usually a good idea to actually try and make the lighting similar to when you're shading, to try and make the lighting some kind of color other than pure white, because typically when you do pure white, you end up it will sometimes suck the saturation out of your colors a little bit. And like when you do colors, like I tend to default to gold a lot, just because gold is typically a good color to really make a color pop a little bit more, you know? So, yeah, that would be my only real solid, like, general tip I can think of off the top of my head. I'm really bad at giving, like, just general advice because subjects like that are so broad. Are you kidding me? No, are you kidding me? Am I still here? Okay, for a second it showed my stream, but we're apparently okay. So, it spooked me. The stream did a spoop. How do you mood light, like sunsets? Mood lighting, I will say, that one's where I can give a little bit more specific advice, because I love mood lighting a lot. And that one is going to it requires you to use a lot of really very contrasting colors, and it's usually done better if you're willing to kind of tweak the colors of your design a little bit, and not just start with the basic, with the flat colors you have when you start. And what I mean by that, like for example with her, if I wanted to make this character, if I wanted to do a more dynamic picture, I would start rather than like with this color. I would pick like, I might take like a blue or whatever, and I might put it here, or put it like right there, and I would take something and I would either like multiply it or I'd play around with layer settings. I might even do something like hue or color and and suddenly you have different colors, but then if you shade on top of that, you get like a different effect, because this looks more like dreamy whatever. If you wanted it to look more like red, you do something like that. If you wanted it to look like green for some reason, if you play around like stuff like that, or if you wanted it, like for example, if you're doing like a night scene, typically what I think actually helps is if you actually start your character like this. If you usually start here and then start shading, it'll make your character look, because already like this, now the character suddenly looks like they're dark, you know? Because when you take it away, the character looks like they're in a full spotlight lighting, you know? But if you want them to look like they're at night, you start like this, and then you do your shading and you do your lighting on top of this. You know what I mean? And that tends to be my secret for like when you want to do very extreme mood lighting, or if you want to do like really dramatic nighttime lighting, is to start with with your character's colors very desaturated or very tinted or even very dark to begin with, because then when you do lighting, it's going to contrast a lot more. And then of course, simply just picking very contrasting colors to shade with, like picking, if you pick, like for me, I typically shade with blue and with like purple and gold. If I wanted to do an extremely dramatic piece, I would make those shadows really, really dark and maybe even a really, really rich purple. And then I would make the gold lighting, I would make it very, very bright and very, very gold and very, very vibrant. The more contrast, the better. Typically, when you're making a dramatic picture, it shouldn't be too much to where it's like distracting and you can't tell what you're focusing on. But when you're trying to do something that looks dramatic or have a certain mood to it, definitely play around with that contrast and play around with different colors and play around with very extreme colors. And don't be afraid to tint your character's colors and things like that to get there. What if you use MS Paint and can't layer? Well, that's going to be up to you to figure out, and you're just gonna have to figure out how to see those colors without using things like multiply and things like that. You can still do it. It's just a little bit harder. Do you change colors depending on the color of what you're shading, or you sometimes picks and it works throughout? My default tends to be either like a kind of a very desaturated, like I'm showing you right now, a very desaturated pink. Typically my default's about somewhere like right here. For this character, I'm doing something a little bit more purple because she has a lot of blue. But typically, if I have a character that has like, you know, like a lot of skin showing, so I need to use my red. But I also have, like, the character wears a lot of blue. What I'll typically do is I'll shade with a specific color, I'll lock the layer, and I'll go back and I'll change the color of the shadows in the specific places I need to change it, and that will help. That helps a lot. I need to do this. Okay. How many people know you're doing these gifts for them? Some of them have seen, like, caught me doing them in the streams. So some of them will know that way, but for the most part, I haven't told most of them directly that I'm doing it. So some of them are in the dark about it, but I haven't been hiding it intentionally. I'm just trying to, like, I'm just doing them, and then once I'm usually done with theirs, I'll send it to them so they can have it. But I'm not hiding it, it's just the fact that if they don't watch my live streams, they wouldn't know. Zodiac. Let's say someone makes a character of a specific species, then another person makes a different species and never saw the original person's work. However, the original person found them and begins harassing them. What do you think of that? Well, I mean, depending on the situation, it's ridiculous. Like, you know, especially when it comes to things like, when it's like a very simple idea where people could have easily come up with on it, where people could have came up with it on their own, or even, like other people have technically already come up with the idea just in slightly different ways. I think it's ridiculous, you know? Especially if it's very obvious the person has no idea who you are. I've seen people who do intentionally rip off people's species ideas, you know, intentionally, but typically you can see the difference, you know what I mean? You can see the difference between someone who came up with it all on their own versus somebody who intentionally stole another person's idea and is trying to tout themselves like, look at me, I'm so original, you know? There's definitely a difference. But I don't think in most cases, though, anyone should be sending their fans to harass anyone. I think that always kind of puts most people pretty much automatically in the wrong when they actually intentionally send their fans to harass people. And obviously some fans are insane, and some fans will harass people when the creator has explicitly said that, like, don't do that. But, like, you know, if the creator verbally says, like, go attack them or go, like, false flag them or whatever, I think that's, like, totally scummy, and I think you immediately lose the argument when you do things like that. How do you draw nails without turning them into claws? That keeps happening to me when I draw ladies. What I tend to do is, like, because I've been trying to do more fingernails as well, and what I tend to do is, like, it's hard to see on this picture. I think I have another character in this batch I can show in a second that has it better, but I tend to just kind of round it off a little bit towards the top of the finger. And you just don't make it go, like, super far over the tip of the finger, typically. I understand what you mean, though. I had a problem with that for a while. So yeah, will you continue? I will continue drawing them. I swear I have, like, I've been having them. I have little things sketched out. That is going to come back. It's going to come back better than ever. But it isn't right this second, but it will. Let me see if I can find that better example for you in one of these characters, because I swear I did it. Maybe not. You can kind of see hers right there. I guess I didn't really do it with any characters in this batch, but yeah, you can do it though. It's just he's basically making it a little bit more rounded than rather than like pointy. Okay, second layer of shading, yay! How do you choose colors for your designs? Well, I mean, it depends on what I'm designing exactly. Some have rules, or, like, quote-unquote rules genetically when going into it. Like, for my fantasy characters, typically, depending on what species they are, I have certain limits on what colors I can pick, whatever. It just depends on what I'm doing, really. And some characters have, like, a color theme to them, whatever, so it varies. I don't really have one strict strategy I go with when I'm picking colors. Have you ever had problems with your art style changing drastically when you don't feel ready for it to change? I just figured out how to make my style look good, and now it's changing. Not really. I've never really had my style change in a way that I didn't like, so I don't know. I guess I've never had problems with it changing, like, too rapidly. Maybe with the exception of, like, when you're doing a comic and your style's changing really fast and you're like, shoot. But, you know. Determined to get this done. How do you shade clothes or anything else to get that look soft or smooth? Airbrush is going to be your best friend in that case. If you want something to look very, very smooth, you should take an airbrush to it. Because typically cell shading is going to make things look pretty hard, just by nature of it. So if you want something to look really, really soft and smooth, you're going to want to take an airbrush to it. And round as well, if you want something to look round. Random questions unrelated to atoms. It's like eerily quiet in my house now. It's mildly unsettling. Do you have any ships that everyone likes but you can't wrap your head around? I mean, I guess there's a few, but I don't know like which ones they are off the top. Oh, a lot of the ones I'm sure that I think of are like related to musicals. I'm someone who likes musicals, and I don't understand how there are these like super passionate fan bases surrounding them that do fan art and all that stuff for it. But like one for sure that I've never been able to understand why is the ship for Dear Evan Hansen, where people ship Evan and the guy who dies in the show. And the reason why is because it is specifically said in the play that the whole joke about them being gay for each other was a joke. They have never spoken to each other. The brief time they had spoken together, they didn't get along. And, like, they do not know each other. So I've never understood why there's, like, a lot of people who ship them together. Especially because it kind of, like, it kind of ruins the idea of the story a little bit, because the idea is this is a guy that Evan doesn't know. That was an important part of the plot. So, like, it's just that's one of the ones that, I just, again, it's not one I'd ever go up to somebody and say, hey, stop shipping that, you know? It's just something I just don't understand where the appeal of that comes from. Especially because, again, in the show, Evan has has a crush in the show. And again, nothing about the 10 seconds they interacted made the two compatible. And they've never met each other or known each other, and them being gay for each other was just used as a joke, you know? It's a funny one. I laughed so hard at that song, but it was a joke, you know? It's I love that song so much. My sister's hot. That song is hilarious. I've listened to it. My brother's not a huge fan of musicals, but he'll sing along with me to that song in the car because we both think it's just really funny. Have you heard about situations where artists claim or try to buy rights to things such as color palettes, poses, etc., or other daily common things? I have heard about stuff like that, and I think that kind of stuff is really silly. And like, good luck trying to win a court case about that, dudes. Like, you know. Pose add-ups. Well, here's the thing. Like, people selling a base is one thing, because typically when people like quote unquote sell poses, it's either a yitch, which is a your character here, which in that case it's basically like half commissioning the artist because the pose is already there. You're just paying to have your like the artist finish it with your character in it. So those I think are entirely fine because you're paying an artist to work, you know? And I also think it's fine if there's a base. Like if someone's saying, here's a base I made, you can pay me a few dollars to use it. I think that's fair. I do agree though that when artists say like you can't use this as a like a reference. You can't use it as a reference unless you pay me. I think that's ridiculous. Or if you say that like to just use this pose in general, you have to pay me. Again, if it's a base, that's different because you're then at that point it's somebody paying you to draw on the base, not use it as a reference. They're paying to draw on it, which is fair. It's just not fair to say like you can't even use this as a reference unless you pay. You know what I mean? And there are some things where it's like they're technically not illegal, but I think that like in a moral sense it's a little like scummy. Like for example, if someone was selling a base and then somebody like referenced that base super heavily and then made a yitch out of it or something, I think that's a little bit like, you know where your inspiration came from at that point. You did that intentionally. But you know, again, that's different than just using it as a reference for like how you want a leg to look or something like that. You know what I mean? How do you make a realistic scar? Like how to make scar placements look like they could really happen? Um, I do have some tips on that actually. Uh, I think where most people go, like, have their problems making scars look realistic, is that they typically, you know, I mean, they'll typically default to trying to draw on the scar onto the face, or onto whatever it is, when in reality, like, you know, that's what's usually going to make it look kind of like it's more makeup rather than an actual scar, just because normal scars aren't drawn onto the face. And it does depend on what kind of scar you're doing. Like light scratch, like making a character look scratched up using like pale light scarring, that's usually not something you have to think about too much. Typically, if you have a lot of those, they'll look pretty real, um, depending on what you're doing and all that. Uh, but when you want to make like a really gnarly looking scar, I do have some tips for this. So just give me a second, and I'll definitely do a little example for you. Um, for those, it has a lot to do with figuring out the dimension, like how your character would work, like three-dimensionally, like how that face would look three-dimensionally, and making sure you understand that a deep scar is gonna have some kind of indentation and shape on the face. You know what I mean? So I'll do it onto the side here. Um, for example, if you were drawing a character here, like for example, eye scars are a really good one that when done correctly, they're really easy to make look real. So say you have your character's eye here. Um, Now, say you don't know how you want your character's scar to look because this is like the first time you've ever designed this character. So, you know, you don't like, you're not used to drawing them or whatever. The first thing I would recommend is like figure out a line for your scar. So, like, for example, for this one, And also figure out like how they got that scar, because how they got that scar is going to depend on what it's going to look like. So just first of all, figure out where your scar is. And as you can see here, rather than just drawing a line here, you try and figure out the dimensions of the face. So it goes back on the forehead, it bends down here as it goes into the face, it kind of wraps around where the eyelid is, and then it wraps around the cheek here. Now for eye scars, for one thing, if it goes through the eyebrow, this eyebrow will now cease to grow in the scarred area. So you're gonna have a little bit, you're gonna have that little like cut off there with the eyebrow. And with eyes, this is actually just like a personal thing for me. I really like this kind of stuff. Eyelids are rather delicate. So you're usually going to have, if you have a deep scar right by the eye, you're probably going to have a cut in that eyelid, and this person's probably going to end up being blind, you know, because if it's a scar that deep or whatever. So, you know, stuff like that. And again, if you're doing like light scarring on a character, you just want to try and make like those scars light, and typically try and make it plentiful, and you can make your character look scarred up without it being super major. If you were doing a scar on the body, for example, this is going to be a really roughed up body real quick. But it's just a matter of knowing how your characters, you know, honestly, if you wanted to do a character that was more cartoony with a scar, like say you have like a really silly looking style going on here, and your character's super round and stylized, but you want to have it like have this gnarly scar on their chest, well, like just figure out like the shape of the character's body, the 3 dimensions of it, and have the scar follow those dimensions. And again, it does depend what it is. Like that, for example, like this would probably be something like if they were slashed by a sword. If you wanted to make it look like it was an animal scar, then you're going to want to make it look like either claw marks, or you might want to do teeth marks in here, which are going to look like spots. If you wanted to do burn scars are going to look like pretty gnarly, and you're going to have a lot of roughed up skin wherever the burn was. And typically, not a lot of people know this, but if your character's arm is like burned or something like that, their fingers are probably going to be fused together. Not a lot of people include that, if they don't lose that limb, that is. If you wanted to do something where it was like they fell down a cliff or something like that, so they have a really jaggedy scar, I just kind of let your hand go wherever it wants to, and then boom, gnarly looking like fell down a cliff scar right there. So, near the throat though. They wouldn't automatically die if they had a scar near their throat. It just depends on the scar. Like if there's a certain artery in your neck, you cut it, you're probably dead. Like, because you're going to bleed out. But you can have scars like around a character. Boiling water scar, well, that's going to be a burn scar typically. And again, if all else fails, you just look it up. Like if you want to look up what a certain kind of scar would look like, look it up. Trust me. That's the secret to anything. But again, if you wanted to make your character look like they were roughed up, but like they don't have any deep scars, just do this a lot. Like everywhere. Just a bunch of these. You could even have a combination of both. Like you got a bunch of like these light scars. Like my character Phoenix has this. Like you have a lot of light scars because you get in a lot of roughed up fights. But then like on your shoulder here, you got like this cool looking nasty scar right here. Dents into your skin a little bit because that's how that goes. Because your skin's really soft and squishy. But you know, I also would like to say that when you're coming to doing like indents like that, thinner skin is not going to have a thick indent, but thicker skin will. So if your character has a scar on their back, like if your character's a deep scar on their back, they're going to have a pretty noticeable indent right here. But if they have their scar like on their forearm, like really close to their bone, it's probably not going to be as dramatic because it's really close to the bone. So, you know, like on the back though, you can have some pretty deep scars on your back. You know, because you have a lot of thick skin on your back. So, you know. Oh, yeah, do be careful, though. If you look up scars for reference material, you might get some disturbing, like, you might get some, not like nasty pictures most of the time, but just be warned, you're looking at stuff that's going to be a little, like, you're going to see some body horror stuff, you know? So, If you're not comfortable with that, be careful. But like, you know, if you need a reference, I'd try and go find a reference. If there's a scar on the eye, would the eyebrow go back or would it never go back? Typically, no. In fact, actually, there's a lot of people out there, like, it's really, really common for people to have eyebrows like this, and you can't even see their scar. Like, they could just have an eyebrow like this, and there's no scar here, no nothing, it's just like this, because at some point they got a scratch there, and the hair didn't grow back. So typically, if you get a scar across your eyebrow, that hair is gone. It's not going to grow back. Because the skin becomes too coagulated and it's not going to grow back properly. All right. You're going to see some scarring stuff. Indeed. All right, hang on. Let me, like, do the final touch on this babe, and then I'll answer a few more questions if you guys have them. I'm so close. I want to just do, like, little reflecty thing, because these are glasses, and reflecty things are cool. I just want to do real quick, I want to do just a very light little, just to make her look a little bit, have a little bit more of a glow on that hair, because that hair is so rich and red. There we go. All right, cool. All right, so now I'll answer a few more questions if you guys want, but I am now done with this. Huzzah! There you go. Thank you for watching me draw this, but I'll answer a few more questions if you guys have them. Not a whole lot more, because at some point I need to chill, but yeah, I'll just leave that on screen for a second. Coming up with color palettes, well, just again, like I said earlier, it just depends on the situation. Like, it depends on the character, it depends on the story, it depends on whatever, you know. So what about someone turning a complete concept on its head, then still considering it the same concept? Example, one of my characters is a zombie, but doesn't eat brains, yet I consider her a zombie. I think that's fine. I intentionally did that recently with, I have a big fantasy story, and obviously because it's a fantasy world, I'm like, well, I guess I should put vampires in there somewhere, but I decided I would take it where I didn't make traditional vampires at all. My vampires in that world, in fact, vampire is technically a derogatory term in my world, because it implies something that they are not. But my vampires, quote unquote, are bats. They're basically more like anthropomorphic vampire bats. So they have a lot of traits and habits similar to actual real life vampire bats. They're very they're very small. They're very like family oriented. They're actually very like docile creatures. Like they don't kill anything to eat it. They just kind of like, you don't even really feel them when they drink blood or whatever, and then like they lick your wound so it'll close up and it also will be disinfected. And they're very, very nice creatures, but people, you know, they get scared at the idea of a creature coming in the middle of the night to drink their blood, so they think they're monsters. But I have a concept like that, so I don't think there's anything wrong with taking a general concept that most people know and then doing something with it that is unusual. You know what I mean? In fact, that's my favorite kind of thing. Any tips on drawing different head / jaw shapes? Look up pictures. People do not realize how drastically different faces can look like in the real world, because media typically, I mean, let's just be real. Media often favors specific jaw shapes and face shapes for men and for women. And you'll see variation sometimes, but it won't be obvious. So just look up pictures of that kind of stuff and like try to draw specific people with like very extreme faces, and try to draw those faces from that reference. And also just play around with it, exaggerate things, make someone have a really long and pointy chin, make someone have a really huge nose, make someone have a really sharp jaw or no jaw at all, make someone where it's like their chin just merges with their neck or something, just play around with that stuff. How do you feel about edgy OCs or with OCs with tragic backstories? I mean, real people have tragic backstories. I think there's right and wrong ways to do it, but I don't think it comes down to like edgy characters equal inherently bad. I just think it's like inexperience equals bad. And I've seen plenty of characters where it's like they have really very exaggeratedly bad backstories, but it never comes to anything. Because I mean, I have a character. One of my favorite characters right now that I've been using and role playing with, his backstory is like super fucked up and it's really sad. But I love writing him because we're writing his plot, his character development and his plot and his story and stuff. And he's an interesting character because he is more than just the trauma and all that. But you can do a character with like really tragic backstories or really edgy characters, and you can do them perfectly right. It's just usually people who are inexperienced can't do them right, and that's where things like that happen. Tips on drawing dresses. Once again, unfortunately, the reality is going to be references. It depends on what kind of dress you're drawing, because there's different kinds of dresses, different kinds of dress shapes. Certain dresses have different kinds of ruffles and different kinds of figures and forms to it. So it depends on what kind of dress you're drawing, really. But again, references is usually key to everything. How to make a violent character cute. Well, the only thing I think of is that they'd have to look cute, you know? Typically hard to make a violent character in personality cute. But typically, if you want to make them look cute, just make them look cute. I mean, not all violent people in real life look ugly or hideous. How would you draw someone that is yelling? I mean, open mouth. You just have to look up pictures, dude. I don't know any like key secret to drawing someone yelling, really. Will we get concept art of like the harpies from Heaven's Proxy? Certainly someday when I get around to it. But yes, you will. I'm working on more concept art at the moment because I want to do more for it. What kind of stories am I into? A lot of different kinds, really. I don't really have a specific genre I'm like really hardcore into. I tend to like fiction more than nonfiction, but like, I don't really have a lot of specific kinds and genres of stories that I'm strictly into. Evan Edgiosi's dad is a big bad and killed his mom. And this is driving force when he meets other OCs. How do you do character development without it being too off character? I don't know how to answer that because there's a lot of different ways you can do that. That's one of those questions that's a bit too broad for me to give you any good advice on it. I would just all I could tell you is just do what seems realistic, but even that's not very helpful. So I'm sorry, I can't really give you very specific advice on that. Have you read Keeper of the Lost Cities? I've not. What's your opinion on overpowered characters, like characters that are gods or can easily overpower everyone else in the world? Unlike most people, I do not think they are inherently bad. I think plenty of overpowered characters can be done perfectly well. Is it harder to write them? Yes. Can most people not write overpowered characters well? Yes. But I don't think they're inherently bad, and I think that they're fine when written correctly, and I think the whole rule of, like, everyone has to be on an equal playing field is ridiculous. But, Will Seven Deadly Sins is expected to come out during... It'll continue at some point, I swear. I'm working on it, slowly but surely. I'm horrible at keeping consistent, but it's okay. It's still a thing. It hasn't died yet. It's just really slow going. Okay, how about this? 4 minutes, I'll stop the stream, because then it will be 10 o'clock for me, so... You got 4 minutes, guys. Excited for any new horror movies coming out? I'm not. Here's what's funny. I I love horror as an art form and as a genre, and I love and respect psychological horror. I love horror stories. I love the SCP Foundation, all that stuff. I like watching people play horror games sometimes, stuff like that. However, I do not like horror movies, like really much at all, just because I don't really like watching slasher films. I can admire slasher films as an art form. I just don't like watching them. And I don't like playing horror games and stuff like that. I prefer to watch from afar, kind of thing. Or have like secondhand fear. What story format do you think suits Luniverse or Heaven's Proxies? Do you think novel format or comic format for all your stories? I can actually go through this because that's what I've thought about for a lot of my stories. Luniverse, that one would have to be one that if it was an actual like book kind of story, it would have to be a comic. The story, the way I've designed the characters is so visual, it would have to be, it could not be a novel, is, you know what I mean? It couldn't be a novel. However, the character designs and the story is so elaborate that it'd make a cool animation, but it would take a long fucking time to animate it. So like comic would have to be the perfect middle ground for Luniverse. However, over this past year, my heart has grown fonder and fonder to the idea of Luniverse being a video game. I don't know how I'd make that happen. I mean, then again, Luniverse would be something that I would never start until way later. Like, it would be something I would start after I've maybe published one or two stories or something like that. But either way, over time, I've grown very fond of the idea of Luniverse being a video game, especially because there'd be a lot of meta stuff and all that sort of thing. So like having it be like a video game would be really really cool. So either that or a comic, if I could ever figure out how to make it a video game. Then Heaven's Proxies isn't going to be a novel series. It's going to be a whenever I get around to like writing it again, it wouldn't be the first. It's like kind of, I call it my Lord of the Rings kind of thing. Other stories, Naturia is something I've always thought of being as a children's cartoon, maybe a video game even. That might be cool. If I get into the video game industry, maybe so. But that one's always, I've seen it as like a children's cartoon. Firebird is one that I've always seen as being. See, like I don't know why in like the recent year I've started imagining like all of my games as video games, but like Firebird's one that might make a cool video game, like a really cool kind of video game. But that one would probably be one that would also be fine as a comic as well. I have a story called Colorful, and that one, I would love that one to be an animated series. But I would have to wait till I would be able to like assemble a team to do it because it is not something I'd be able to do on my own. So out of my main stories, that's what I got right now. Sorry, that was tangent was 4 minutes, so I'll allot 5 more minutes to other characters. So I'm sorry about that. Have any characters that carry machines around with them, like heart monitors, breathing machines, etc.? Not currently. I haven't had any characters that have fit those kind of roles as of yet. Just making a mobile game. Well, I know, but still, making a mobile game ain't easy either. Just because it's easier to get doesn't mean it's easier to make. And making Luniverse a video game, or any of my stories a video game, would not be a simple A to B kind of thing. Wouldn't be easy as making like a repetitive, like, idle game. It would be a huge story-driven game, and it would be very long. Ever had a character you hated from day one? I mean, if you mean like hate them but love them as a character, then Solar, because he's my dickweed of a villain. But I don't have any characters that I've like I've actually like genuinely not liked, like to draw or to write or whatever. Please tell me that Jay and Jackson end up together because my shipper's heart can't handle them not being together. Well, I can't say anything because I haven't finished exploring. I haven't technically finished exploring their route to their adventure together, so I can't say anything about that. That's right. Plus all the go. Yeah, and I am not a programmer. I would love to like write a video game. I'd love to be a part of it. The school I'm going to, if I go in August, that one is actually a little bit more aimed towards special effects as well as video games. So you know, who knows? I might get into the video game industry and I might make some video games. Who knows? Um, Gender swap? What? I'm not sure what your question is. Uh, your tone gives me hope. Do your characters carry around things? I said earlier, I don't have any characters like that currently, but that's also because a lot of my stories aren't really set in time periods where that kind of thing would make sense. Some of them are, but not all of them. A lot of them aren't. Especially like, you know, can't really do that for Heaven's Proxies because they kind of live in an archaic medieval time period, where stuff like that doesn't exist. That doesn't really exist in like couldn't exist in like Firebird. Well, I mean Firebird it could exist, but just the characters that are mostly in Firebird it couldn't. So most of them could. Technically, I guess Luniverse could, but a lot of the characters in that story come from different places. Uh, so there's that. But I mean, I do have characters that are like I do have a character like who's in a wheelchair. I have stuff like that. I have a few characters with like prosthetic limbs and stuff, but I don't have any that have breathing machines or heart monitors or anything like that. Who knows? I'll probably make one someday, but you know, I like making things that I have not made before. Do you have any tips for making OP characters? Mine would just be make sure that like their character is interesting and doesn't rest entirely on the fact that they are powerful. And also, I will be honest, it is really hard to make an overpowered character the protagonist unless they have a really solid personality for it. Um, how do you feel about slower paced stories? How long do you give a story a chance before quitting it? Depends. Sometimes I'm okay with slower paced stories, but sometimes it hurts. Like I was recently rewatching a non commentary version of like Heavy Rain, and by God, I had totally forgotten how fucking slow that game starts. It starts so agonizingly slow because it's building up all the story and all the plot and the tutorial and everything. So like it depends on the story. Some stories can get away with starting out slower paced, but some cannot. And I think that's been my 5 minutes. So I'm gonna end the stream here. Thank you guys so much for coming. By the way, though, it was a pleasure having you here, and I will see you in the next video, whatever that may be, or if it's the live stream or whatever it is. But thank you all for coming and suffering through this with me, and I will see you all.